did you sit down with Jack Smith's office, and how long did you talk to them for?
I don't know exactly when that was. I mean, it's been months ago, but really didn't last that long. I mean, I basically told them the same thing I told the special grand juries, that I followed the law and the Constitution and answered all their questions truthfully.
Republican Georgia Governor Brian Kemp revealing in an interview last night that he sat down for an interview with Jack Smith's office regarding Donald Trump's efforts to subvert the 2020 election. NBC News previously reported that the governor had been in contact with Smith's office, but a Kemp spokesperson declined to provide any further comment at the time. Governor Kemp resisted intense pressure from Trump in the wake of the 2020 election after the ex-president called the governor to ask him to overturn Joe Biden's victory in the state. We are back with Lisa Rubin and Andrew Weissman. Lisa, what is it that Jack Smith wants to know from Governor Kemp?
I think what he wants to know from Governor Kemp is what Governor Kemp may have known in turn from other participants in Georgia, right? We know, obviously, that Donald Trump called Brad Raffensperger and that infamous call on January 2nd or 3rd. We also now know that Donald Trump reached out to then Georgia Speaker David Ralston, who has since passed away, and tried to get the state legislature to do something. I think what they want to know is, what did you know about those conversations, and to what extent did he try to reach you too and get you involved in some sort of scheme to overturn the will of the people in your state and to send to Congress an alternate or fake slate of electors that they could use to keep Donald Trump in power?
Andrew, I want to read just a little bit from the January 6th committee report on Trump's pressure on Kemp. Quote, on December 5th, President Trump traveled to Georgia to headline a rally, but the president's day started with a morning call to Governor Brian Kemp, during which they discussed reconvening the legislature in a special session. After the call, Kemp took to Twitter. He acknowledged that he had spoken to the president and that he told the president that he supported the idea of and had already called for a signature audit in Georgia. President Trump responded later that night by complaining that Georgia had not yet done a signature verification audit and instead insisted that the governor should at least immediately ask for a special session of the legislature. The following day, Governor Kemp and Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan issued a definitive statement rejecting President Trump and his allies' calls to overturn the results in Georgia. Just from that, how much, Andrew, do you think Kemp could speak to Trump's criminal intent?
A lot. I want to make sure that people understand that Jack Smith and his team are going to scour the earth with respect to any effort by Donald Trump or his conspirators to reach out to the various states at issue, of which Georgia is one, but that's just one. They will have contacted everyone they can possibly think of who had those direct communications, whether oral or in writing. And remember, that can be either Donald Trump himself having conversations, as Lisa correctly noted, various people in Georgia, obviously the famous taped phone call with Brad Raffensperger. But it doesn't have to be Trump himself. It can be people on his behalf from the Trump campaign. It can be Mark Meadows. All of that would be admissible under what's called the co-conspirator exception to the hearsay rule. So this reporting is important, but I want to make sure people understand that there is going to be a whole lot more than this at various state levels, whether it's Nevada, Arizona, Michigan, Georgia, Pennsylvania, that Jack Smith will have in his quiver and will have interviewed these people and made a decision about who to call as witnesses and thoroughly prep them. Remember, the standard that he has to meet is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And as somebody who is such an experienced state and federal prosecutor, he knows that he has to have all of these ducks in a row. So I'm not at all surprised by the reporting, but this is very much going to be sort of the tip of the iceberg as to what we can expect if and when the D.C. federal trial begins.
If and when, thank you for that important caveat. Lisa, you know, Governor Kemp previously fought testifying to Fani Willis's team until for over a year, until a judge then ordered his appearance. Why do you think he fought that and not meeting with Jack Smith?
I don't know, except to say that his testimony to Fani Willis's special purpose grand jury occurred in 2022. It may be that having lost that battle, he felt like he would similarly lose a battle over his testimony, particularly if served with a grand jury subpoena in Jack Smith's investigation. It's also the possibility, Alicia, that what plays in the home state with respect to one of these investigations, it's a very different set of circumstances when Jack Smith's office is asking you for your informal cooperation, right? He got to do this behind the scenes. People suspected that he had talked to them, but none of us knew that until last night or today. So as opposed to the Fani Willis situation, where that played out very publicly and Brian Kemp wanted to take a stand. Remember, Brian Kemp is sort of sui generis among Republican politicians right now. He has claimed some ground for himself where nobody doubts his bona fides as a Republican, and yet he, like Brad Raffensperger, has carved out some significant distance from Donald Trump in ways that aren't tenable for most elected Republicans in other states. The other thing I want to add to what Andrew said is that if you look at the federal election interference indictment, there aren't mentions of what you read from the January 6th report in their indictment in terms of the reach out to Brian Kemp. That may be that at that time they didn't yet have what they have now. It could also be that they are holding some of their cards, right? And Andrew knows better than anybody that the facts laid out in indictment don't necessarily represent the totality of what the government is ready to prove and can prove beyond a reasonable doubt at trial. And so I urge people to, take this as a floor, not a ceiling, in terms of what Jack Smith and his team have up their sleeves.